Hi, I'm Dan Woods from Shape Security. Thanks for your interest in today's webinar. So at Shape Security, I head up the Shape Intelligence Center. What that means is I have a bunch of data scientists and analysts, investigators who pore over all the data looking for interesting insights about manual attacks and automated attacks. And I'm going to share with you some of those insights today over the next 25 minutes or so. I'm going to start by talking about how attackers evolve. They start with very, very simple tools like curl and Sentry MBA. They don't have any mouse movements or keystrokes, and they're really not doing anything to spoof a particular device or a browser. These are very easy to defeat. A simple JavaScript challenge will defeat these. If that doesn't work, then the attackers start to come from more IPs, additional autonomous systems, different countries, and then they start to focus on different IPs, like rather than coming from hosted IPs, they might come from residential IPs. And they do this because that's how they're accustomed to being mitigated using traditional countermeasures like web application firewalls. If this works, then they don't evolve any further. There's no reason to. If it doesn't work, however, they tear down that infrastructure and they start to use improved tools that execute JavaScript, tools that do a much better job replicating a browser environment. In the beginning, however, they're not typically very good at generating mouse movements and keystrokes that are consistent with a human. Over time, they get better if they're mitigated. Again, if they're not mitigated, then they don't continue to evolve. They also aren't very good at, spoofing devices or browsers. And what I mean by that is, they might have a few dozen or even a few hundred devices, but they need to represent themselves as thousands or millions of devices. So they need to represent that they're a different user agent than they actually are. They perhaps need to spoof screen size, whether or not they have plugins, even battery level, whether the device is charging, all sorts of things they need to spoof to make it look like they're coming from more devices than they actually are. Of course, eventually, if they continue to be mitigated, they get much better at spoofing devices and browsers. Attackers typically stay in this sort of mode for a long time. They could take a long time to evolve from virtually no spoofing, no entropy in mouse movement keystrokes, to very human-like automation with coming from thousands or millions of devices that look authentic. Of course, if none of that works, they continue to manipulate their infrastructure just to see if they're being blocked, perhaps by geography or by IP, subnet or something like that. Now, that's a really quick overview of how some of these attackers evolve through automated attack techniques. If you want a deeper dive on this, then I suggest you watch Jared Overson's Credential Stuffing 2020 webinar, which aired, I believe, either just before mine or just after mine. He'll go into quite a bit of detail on the types of tools that are being used, show you curl being used, show you headless browsers being used, Selenium, and many other tools. So it's a very worthwhile webinar. So if an attacker's gone through all of this evolution and they're still continuing to be mitigated, they'll tear down that infrastructure and they'll resort to manual fraud. So these are now real devices, real browsers, real humans, of course. They still have to do some spoofing because, they're, again, dealing with dozens or hundreds of devices, and they want to represent themselves as coming from, many, many more devices. So they continue to spoof, but they often continue to make mistakes. Now, these manual fraudsters are facilitated by all sorts of other types of schemes and malware, like Genesis and Magecart. I'm going to go into Genesis in some detail. So what Genesis is it defeats the browser fingerprinting countermeasure. We've all encountered it. You go to log into your bank and it says, we don't recognize this device. And it triggers some second factor of authentication. Well, those fingerprints are generated using some of the attributes you see on the left side of the screen. So fraudsters needed a way to circumvent this countermeasure. The way it works is a customer is logging in, say with Chrome, to your login application. There's malware on that person's computer. that doesn't just collect, username and password, but collects many of the same attributes that are needed to generate a browser fingerprint. And all of that is sent up to the Genesis marketplace. And if you hit that URL with your browser, you'd get a login screen. This isn't even on the dark web. It's an invitation-only marketplace that is accessible using any browser. So a bad actor using a Chromium-based browser will get an account on the Genesis marketplace, buy what they call a bot, download all that information into the Chromium-based browser. And the reason a Chromium-based browser is required is it's compatible with the Genesis security plugin. This is a plugin that takes all the information downloaded from the Genesis marketplace and converts the Chromium-based browser into a match of the victim's browser. So now all the fraudster has to do is come from an IP address in the same general area as the victim, and he will likely not trigger the "we don't recognize your device." This is what the Genesis digital fingerprint marketplace looks like. Each of these are considered a bot. It's actually kind of a misnomer. They're not bots. They're just a collection of all the usernames and passwords and browser environment details, all those attributes that goes into generating a fingerprint. All of those are included in each of these. It's less than a bot. It's more of a digital dossier on a compromised computer. They're not cheap, anywhere from $46. I've seen them over $100. I've seen them as cheap as $1.50 when they go on sale. At the time I did this screen grab, roughly 127,000 bots were for sale. Right now, it's about 230,000, so the marketplace is growing. And if I zoom in on some of the accounts that have been identified on the infected machine, you can see they are not mom and pops. These are the Googles, the Amazons, the Facebooks. So if you were to buy this bot for $81.50, you would get the username and password to all of those accounts, and then 370 other accounts that aren't identified. Here's the next bot, 117 known and 446 unknown. Again, you see large banks, social networks, you even see digital currency exchanges, telecommunications companies. And here's the third bot on the screen, well over 1,000 username and password pairs. Now, you don't get the username and password for every single one of them. You get the usernames and passwords that the malware has collected. And they'll tell you, there's a little honor among thieves here. They'll tell you whether or not the password exists or whether it doesn't. Sometimes the password exists and the login doesn't. It all just depends on whether or not the malware has collected it. Now, I've been researching this for probably about 6 months, and without fail, probably 90%, if not higher, of all the known resources that are provided have username and password. Occasionally, I'll come up with one where the password is empty or the login is empty. On the left side of the screen, you see that I've made 11 purchases in green, the blue circle with a 1 in it. That means I have an update. So 127,000 bots in the marketplace may not seem like a lot, but once you buy a bot, it is removed from the marketplace. And my research shows that these bots last, just a couple of weeks in the marketplace before they're priced to sell. They really go on a deep discount. So, 127, 200,000, 230,000 bots really represents millions of bots passing through this marketplace every few weeks. Now, what's interesting is after I purchase a bot and I'm using it, if the malware collects, say, an updated password, then it is passed through the marketplace to me as the owner of the bot. So it isn't enough to reset the victim's password because the malware is just going to collect the new password. This really surprised me. They have quite an effective customer service organization. I encountered a problem when generating a fingerprint at one time, and I submitted a ticket, and they responded very quickly, and they were very helpful. And what surprised me is all of their interaction with me was in perfect written English. Here's the real power of the Genesis marketplace, the ability to generate a fingerprint. You click that and it launches this wizard. The first thing you do is you select the bot you want to use to generate the fingerprint, and you can see on the screen it already has quite a lot of information from the victim's computer, many of the same attributes used to generate browser fingerprints. Over on the right, you see the IP address, the country, the browser. That IP address is the IP address that has the malware installed on it. Oftentimes, these are shared computers. The next step in the fingerprint generation process is you generate a config file. You can see here I'm going to import 419 cookies from the victim's machine. And as you do it, you get these encouraging pop-ups throughout the process, telling you how great you are. Next step is you review the config file, and this is where you can start spoofing many of the attributes. You see the user agent at the top, language, time zone, various headers. Go to the next step and you see just additional information that you can tailor: the screen size, window size. You can customize the plugins, even the battery level you see in the upper right. And when you've got everything set, you just click the green button that says Create Config. You can see the price is $0. You can create one config for every bot for free. After that, it's $1. And when you're done, then all you need to do is click the green button that says Download in Genesis Security, and that downloads it into the Genesis Security plugin. You get additional encouraging words, well done. You can see them wishing you luck in the fraud you're about to commit. Then all you have to do is click the icon in the upper right-hand corner to access the Genesis Security plugin and slide that slider switch over to enable the fingerprint. And that turns the fraudster's Chromium-based browser into a close replica of the victim's. And if you're a member of the Commonwealth of Independent States, you need not worry about being victimized by Genesis. In fact, we've reverse engineered a lot of malware, and oftentimes what we'll see is the first thing it does is check to see what the browser language is set at. If it's Russian, it aborts. Okay, so that's Genesis. Let's talk about Magecart. So Magecart is just a general term given to a group of actors who are skimming payment card data off payment pages. If you look at any one kind of a typical payment page, you see it loads an awful lot of JavaScript. If we look at one in particular, you see that it looks to be like a hashing algorithm or a hashing script, and you can see it's served by CDN.js. Well, what do we really know about CDN.js? Just a little open source research attributes it to this person named Peter Dave Hello and roughly 1,300 contributors. Now, maybe Peter Dave Hello is an honorable person, but it's the kind of thing that we should know before allowing their script, their JavaScript, to run on the payment page, because they can make changes to that script that can be quite malicious. So what kind of changes might they make? Well, these are the changes that were made on the British Airways payment page. And as you may have seen in the press, they're facing quite a hefty fine of over $200 million. So you could see the compromised file was Modernizer. And if you look at the roughly 22 lines of code that they introduced to that JavaScript, you could see, you don't have to be a programmer, by the way, to understand this. They simply bind this function to the mouse up and touch end of the submit button. And they serialize all the data in the payment form, and then they send all of that data to a drop site, baways.com. So even the drop site URL is meant to look like the victim. If we look at another example on Newegg, you can see they compromised the file checkout step 2, and they did the same thing. They bound this function to the credit card button, and whenever a mouse up touch end event was called, this function would be called. They serialize all the data in the form. So that's the billing address, the name, the card number, expiration, everything that the person typed into that billing form is entered into an array and then sent to a drop site, neweggsstats.com. And again, you see the drop site is intended to match, at least look like the victim. So if you're interested in learning more about Magecart, well, Wes Hales is going to be doing another webinar. He goes into it in a lot more detail and takes the steps to tell you exactly what you can do to protect yourself from Magecart. All right, so I think what I'm going to leave you with is I think the best way to illustrate the differences between your legitimate human customers, bots, and manual fraudsters. On the left, you see in green mouse movements. In red, you see mouse clicks. You can see that humans sometimes click outside the submit button, just on air, by mistake. Maybe they're pushing the touchpad too hard or something. They also don't move the mouse in perfectly straight lines. On the right, you see bots moving in perfectly straight lines, and you could see where the submit button is. You can see its size, shape, position on the page precisely based only on where the bots click. Manual fraudsters exist right there in the middle. They are certainly less efficient than bots, but they're the most efficient of the humans. And the best example I can think of is, imagine if you were to go to your banking app right now and add a payee and send that payee $2,500. My guess is after you launch the app, you'll have to look for the add payee button. You have to look, maybe not very long, maybe a second or two if the app is well designed, but you have to look for it because you don't click add payee every day. Manual fraudsters, however, they click add payee hundreds of times a day. They're very, very efficient in the way they navigate workflows. So one way to identify manual fraudsters is to write algorithms that pore over the timing events of all of your data, looking for the most efficient humans. If you find the most efficient humans, you're going to find your manual fraudsters. Okay, so that's how attackers evolve from low sophistication attacks to high sophistication attacks, ultimately to manual fraud, and how manual fraud is facilitated by malware like Magecart and Genesis. Thank you very much. My email address is on the screen. Feel free to email me if you have any questions or comments.